nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir le professeur Luigi Marco Bassani, qui est venu de Milan. Monsieur Bassani est historien italien, il est de nationalité américaine et il est né à Chicago. C'est un spécialiste de l'histoire des idées politiques et des doctrines politiques, professeur d'histoire politique américaine donc à l'Université de Milan, auteur de nombreux livres. Mon imprimante a rendu l'âme quand j'ai imprimé la liste que j'ai trouvée de toutes vos publications, de vos copublications, maintes fois censurées, maintes fois attaquées par les néo-féministes. Votre parole libre sonne comme un appel d'engagement de toutes les universitaires contre le wokisme. Monsieur Bassani, professeur Bassani, c'est avec plaisir que je vous laisse la parole.
Merci beaucoup. So, now the thing is, during the Cold War, there was something that we all remember. It was the left, the entire left, the Christian Democrats. They were always in favor of free speech. They said the problem in the Soviet Union was there was no free speech. They didn't care about property rights. Socialism was okay for them, but you had to, free speech. So it was really an absolute fixation for many years, this free speech. Now it's not, of course. What we're living, what is happening is they call it a multicultural society. So it's not really a fact, but it's an ideology. This is what Walz says: in a pluralistic, modern, postmodern immigrant society, a regime of tolerance cannot function steadily unless there is some combination of these two courses of action: defense of group differences and combating class differences. So it's always socialism. At the end, take a look, it's woke, but it is. The best answer for intellectuals is always socialism. Now, wokism is everything that my friends said, my new friends, both of them said exactly, but it's also something that I would call the domestication of intellectuals. Right? So they have to be punished by other intellectuals, and that they have to be taught exactly what the public discourse is about. And if there are certain bizarre things that you think about the public discourse, like sometimes I make fun of these people. I just say, I'm a man trapped in a man's body. Right? So they stop. And they say they think I'm a queer. No, and then they think, no, that's heterosexual. Pretty bad. But so political correctness is really a civic dogma. The idea is that no one who participates in the public debate has to think about it. There are certain issues that are there. So you just use whatever these intellectuals, and basically they're Americans. I mean, you named a lot of very important French thinkers, but they're all Americans. I mean, if you read Habermas, he's writing the same stuff that Nussbaum or Walzer or Michael Sandel, this not too profound American public intellectuals, write. So, I mean, Foucault clearly was profound, but we lost these kind of very intellectuals that are kind of interesting. What happened? Now, the whole thing is Brown versus Board of Education. It was a good thing, great thing. Destroyed segregation in the South. I mean, nobody's going to defend the system prior to that. It was a terrible system, odious system. But the thing is, it was like, in America, it was something that was like the Edict of Nantes. Well, the Edit de Nantes de l'Amérique. It was, in a certain sense, it was the Pandora's box of the contemporary world, because a lot of things came out of that. So also, we mentioned Protestants, right? Protestant and Protestantism. There are two very different Protestant cultures in the United States. One I would call it Southern Baptism. It started that thing started in 1845, but it's been around in the southern states, and I would call it generic Protestantism. And then there's pure Calvinism of the North. And there's a little civil wars. I would say the woke culture is from the North. It's Calvinist, it's Puritan. And they even considered, when there was the Constitution, they considered it a deal with the devil, a pact with the devil, because the Constitution endorsed, in a certain sense, slavery. And slavery is the American original sin. Now, there's a replica, of course, in Europe, but it's much lighter. It's colonialism. It's not terrible. I mean, it's a terrible thing for Europeans, but it's not exactly the same thing. In America, when you walk around, especially in the southern states, and you see a black person, it could be the descendant, and you're white, and there are certain things, you know, ownership of people, something inhuman, bondage, and so on. So it's a kind of, there's a kind of civil war. Now, is there a difference of Wokism, politically correct in America, and as far as gender, homophobia, all these kind of things, and fat phobia? Is there something of that sort in France? You know, I saw it in Spain. You know, it's called the gordophobia. I didn't know what it was. You know, you shouldn't say anything about people's bodies in general if they're too thin. It's just a general, you know, just clearly. But you could go in jail in Spain and certain things. So the other thing is, European multiculturalism is very different from the American one. There's no doubt about it. What is happening in Europe is one monoculture that's coming to Europe. It's Islam. It's not, you know, a general thing when there are different races, there's different ethnicity coming to. No, it's one simple thing, and it's not happening to American. I mean, there are probably 2 or 3 million Islamic people, but that's not an American problem. But the reality of multiculturalism is always read by Walter, by the thought, well, we can call it, which the doctrines, the ideas, the dogmas propagated by Walter, Nussbaum, and Sandel. Now, in Europe, as we noticed before, there is a lot more popular Marxism, not only just cultural Marxism. So there's a lot of more, you know, in Italy, in France, there were big communist parties, and they're still there in the mind of the old people, and so on. So in terms of, in Europe, there's a kind of third worldism that could lead, we already mentioned one name, very important, some sort of Frantz Fanon in a certain sense, but then much more than to critical race theory, which is a mix of Brown v. Board of Education plus Gramsci, right? So, or also we could come up with a Marxist idea that the indigenous people are the bourgeoisie and the newcomers are the proletariat, and have this new stage without the surplus value of anything of that sort. Now, another difference in America is that there are courts. If you have some money, you can pay a lawyer. And you look up, it's in English and Italian, I don't know if there is anything in French, but if you want to look up my last name, put down the New Inquisition against Marco Bassani in English, and you'll find out a little story that happened to me in my university 2 years ago. And I will have some trial, and we'll go to court. Of course, I might get some money out of it, but not like my colleagues in America. Some of them made $700,000, $800,000. So it's really, there are some costs for the deans, not for the students who go there and disrupt things. That's another thing. But, you know, you can go to court. A few months ago, I was in South Africa, and I was talking to a lot of people that didn't like what happened, a lot of things that happened with the lockdowns and so on. I said, how did you fight that? With the courts. They have an incredible system of courts that I think we do not have in Europe. I don't know what the story is in France, but you'll tell me. The other thing is, it's very difficult to imagine a strategy to fight Wokism in Europe. You know, we're worried because we want to be part of the public debate. But the other people, the people like you go and you buy le fromage, and they don't know anything about it. They think, if you're so stupid and you want to stay at the university, that's the price you got to pay, right? You work a lot less than I do, so that is what happens to you, and so on. So that we will never be able to forge a front like we did against communism, telling the little peasants that they're going to steal your vineyards or they're going to steal your car. The communists. No, this is not going to work. So it's really very difficult. The other thing is, there's no boss. There is no boss of Wokism. There's no party. There's no single party, right? Let's say at the end of this conference, we just fire you up so much, and we want to go out and go get those Wokists. We don't find them. Well, they're everywhere, but there's no center. There's not a single place. The old Marxists are not the old one, you know, the old guard of Marxists. They're totally unwoke, and they hate Wokism. So it's not, there's no party. There's no boss and no party to find. The political correct language comes from a militant minority that remains totally unidentified. Then the orthodoxy comes up and it's over, right? Everybody follows that. So there's nothing really centralized. Some people believe that the so-called Christian roots of Europe, we could use these things against Leviathan, the cross against Leviathan. That's a good idea in general. It's not going to work. If you take a look at the Catholic religion, there's nobody more politically correct or woke than the Pope, right? Let's face it, it's a fact. I'm not saying anything about the Pope. I would never do that. But clearly, he's woke, terribly woke. And also, a lot of Protestants everywhere in the United States and in Germany and Sweden and so on, they are inclined to just follow the dominant orthodoxy. So no appeal to the cross can save it. And my point is the opposite of wokeism is freedom. Is freedom for everybody. We're going to give that, if they want to be considered men, women, trapped in, you hear all sorts of these stories. Freedom for everyone, do whatever you want to your body, just leave me alone, Just don't come into my sphere. And we should always argue in the name of freedom as in the best European tradition, from Jean Baudin to John Locke to Voltaire, right? Use all. We see, because everything, all these people, that's all they say, the people is that whenever we talk, we are violent. So they believe that speech acts are actually acts of violence. And so they're fighting a battle against dangerous practices. They say language or assaults, and everyday assault. So I say something stupid about you, just don't, you can punch me in the nose, but actually you suffer. Every day you suffer a lot, and it's a violence. No, I'm not going to say that, but it's a violence against you. So they're very far, all these woke people are very far from the Western tradition and the tolerance. And think about Thomas Jefferson. I'm a Jeffersonian scholar, and Jefferson said, it does me no injury for my neighbor to say that there are 20 gods or no God, and neither picks my pocket or break my leg, right? So say whatever you like. So we got to go back to the basic thing, and we have to say that speech is not violent. So we have to wage a cultural battle and an appreciation of other cultures. We'll never forget that. We've been too much Eurocentric or Euro-American centric, and this would be considered clearly provincial at this point. We don't want that. But this kind of rediscovery of the others should not come to a self-annihilation. And so only when the West war against itself is over, will a free society emerge, and it will be a very much disordered one in its opinions, and all these wars against phobias will fall into the stupidest past, right? Something, I got 1 minute, and that's exactly what I need. You wouldn't believe that. I need a 1 minute, because actually wokeism is nothing but a secular utopia, right? There's therefore pretty much like the old communism, right? It went from utopia to reality to nightmare. Very simple. Dream, utopia, reality, nightmare. So it claims to expunge once and for all sin, all error, vice, and inequality from the face of the earth. And it's really a city of God, and it's a city of God in which we're all moral subjects, equally deserving the state's attention. Some will have to work for others, that's pretty sure, because we are in socialist countries, from America to Europe, everywhere. As the state is, Bastiat's definition of the state, right? Frédéric Bastiat said, the state, c'est la grande fiction par laquelle tout le monde s'efforce de vivre aux dépens de tout le monde. And now it is also the fiction, the state fiction is that does not make us realize that the tax slave is a slave to cour, nothing else but a slave, and also the intellectual whose speech is silenced is the victim, not the culprit. Thank you.